Hey guys, Chris the Bally Guy here on an incline. Bit funny. When I visit my dad, his driveway is on an incline. So the front of my vehicle is facing downhill. So for me to sit in my rolling chair, I have to wedge the armrests underneath the my desk that you can't see. And I just discovered I could use my boots up against another object and one of my legs of the chair to hold it still. So today's topic is about knives. Who could have possibly guessed that I would make a video about knives? But today's video is more about rust prevention, specifically. I wish I had my iPad with me. It's got such a better camera angle. I don't have a wide angle on this thing, but yeah. People have asked me over years, and I've even asked this question: what do you do when your knife rusts? And better question, how do you prevent it from rusting? So, and my inspiration for this video came when I looked over. I have one of those magnet strips for tools screwed into my wall. And if this is the magnet strip, I just have my knives minus my 42 I couldn't bear to ruin the finish on the blade. Just magnetize to it. And when I want one, I just go grab it. And I looked over. And, oh man, I got some rust on my blade. This is one of the few knives that have been passed down from family. This is a handmade Filipino balisong that my great-grandfather passed down to me before he passed. And I think he just traveled a lot, but nevertheless, I mean, it was stiff whenever I got it. You couldn't flip it. I don't flip it a whole lot because it's not really that big or practical to flip. That's one reason. Here's it next to an Alpha Beast. Quite small. But the other reasons, I also just don't want to damage it. Now, as far as handmade Filipinos, this isn't the best made one. But it is a knife nevertheless, and I want it to look nice. So when I look over and I see my knife has rust on it, I'm like, oh man. But I know what to do. So what I did, sorry, a little congested here, is I took some of this grease. Now, you can use slide oil. You can use gun oil, any kind of lubricant used for metal parts. And what I like to do, and I already did it, but I'll do it again. And this is the thing, sidetracking a little bit. The people like to joke that, oh, Chris loves his Bach tuning slide grease, but it really is the best. It's a very thick grease, but it's not too thick for functionality. So, you have parts like in cars. I know we're going to go into the whole cars debacle all over again, but when you have components that have very small points of movement, such as a butterfly knife, you want the thickest thickest lubrication possible, because the way grease works is that and this is going down to a physical level, and I could be wrong about this stuff, but this is the best I understand it. So this is your handle on a microscopic level, and this is your blade on a microscopic level. Let's just assume actually this is the washer and this is the blade. You have your blade, you have your washer, then you have your handle scale, or your handle component. So you have blade, washer, handle, and then blade, washer, handle. And then you have bushings with it all means the same thing. So on a microscopic level, nothing actually touches. Like, the molecules aren't physically touching next to each other, but when you put lubrication on it, it puts there's a spacer between the two. When you have space between something, you don't want the surfaces rubbing up against each other directly. You want something else taking the brunt of the friction so that it doesn't wear out, because metal components wear out. That's just a fact. Which is why cars have bearings. So you have your shaft, and you have a bunch of individual rollers, which are these cylinders that go all the way around the shaft, and then you have another casing that goes around that, and the rollers bridge the gap, and then as it turns around, there's nothing rubbing. Everything's just rolling over itself. There's no metal rubbing against metal per se. It's just metal rods that are rolling over each other. Now, to get even better performance, they grease them. So when you have grease between the rollers, the metal, you could say the metal is really contacting itself, but I mean, nothing really actually makes physical contact at a molecular level. But whenever you put grease between it, it's kind of like, instead of dragging an object across a table, you put a piece of paper between it, and then you drag it by the paper. Now, you can still have wear through the paper, and you could still cause damage to your object, but it's significantly reduced. So the whole purpose of lubrication is to reduce the amount of friction that's going on, because it's physically spacing itself between it. So when you have thicker lubricant, you basically have a thicker barrier. So if you're going to drag something across the table on top of a tissue, yeah, that tissue is going to wear out in like 5 minutes of dragging it across the table. Whereas if you were to take a piece of cardboard and drag it across, there's not going to be as much damage, if any at all. It's going to take a lot longer to wear through it. Now, I know all these principles aren't exactly 100% exactly how they are. I'm explaining things in a way in which they're made to be explained. And obviously, a lot of you watching this video are going to know that. But I want to say I used to have a video where I said all this stuff, so I wanted to say it again. Thicker lubricants are better until the point that it affects your performance. So, I recently got a grease gun so that I could grease my trailer bearings. And the grease that you use for that is like Vaseline level viscosity. It's like not even a liquid. It's barely a liquid. It's so thick. It's like thicker than maple syrup. It's like pure lard, except it's a lubricant. So, all that to say, thicker lubricants are better until they affect your performance, because you put a thicker threshold between the surfaces that are rubbing against each other, and the components just wear out less. And on top of all of that, if that isn't enough to convince you, people love to say my knives have great sound on my YouTube videos and my YouTube shorts and all that, and on Instagram people are like, man, your balisong sounds so great. I don't really remember if that's of this channel or the old one, but I know people have said it before. And I think it affects the sound positively. And on top of that, you just get a smoother, more refined feel. So, yeah, you can use really thin lubricants that are like liquid, or like, hell, you could use WD-40 if you want. And I've used WD-40 before. It does work. But the thing about thicker lubricants is that they do a better job. It makes the experience more enjoyable, and it wears out your knife slower. It keeps it feeling the way that it felt from the factory. And another thing that people don't really talk about is, like, back in the day when the Benchmark Model 53 came out, bearings, IKBS bearings were a thing, which is, let's take this oil filter, for example. Now, why do I have an oil filter on my desk? That's not your concern. But let's say you see how this has like a race going around all the way. So imagine you have two of these right up next to each other with that race, and then you fill it with ball bearings. So you have the two surfaces rubbing up against each other, and there's balls between them. So it was more to do with balance. But one of the arguments at the time that people used to bring up is that because the ball bearings were so frictionless, it made it hard to flip the knife. And that has some truth to it. And that's why you don't really see IKBS bearing systems in all the knives. I don't remember if someone eventually patented it or not. I don't know how they could. If you see a rolling caster, like wheel underneath like a piece of furniture, more often than not, the part that swivels the wheel, this is the wheel, the part that lets the wheel swivel, has basically IKBS bearings. It's a plate on a plate with a race engraved all the way through it on both objects. And the balls have a track, and the two objects have a shaft that goes through them, just like a pivot on a balisong. And they're pulled together, but the ball bearings keep it to where there's a very low friction surface between the two of them and allows it to rotate. Now, what do they use on those ball bearings, do you say? They use a very thick, like yellow teeth ivory kind of looking grease. And it works great. Now, it doesn't free spin super easily, but sometimes you don't want something to free spin. Sometimes the added resistance is better. And for me, this is getting very off topic, but I promise I'm getting back to the topic soon. So, for balisong flipping, I find that a little resistance in the pivot is nice. Having a little bit of a parachute to help add just resistance to it is nice because of how it lets the knife flip. There's a little more delay. Now, keep in mind, it's not going to let the knife flip at the speed of lightning, but it's smoother, and it makes the knife more controllable, in my opinion, up to a certain extent. And that's why this grease, in my opinion, is perfect. It's not that expensive. It's like $8 a bottle right now, which should really cost like one, but we'll not get into that. So, yeah. So sometimes more resistance is better. So where it becomes a problem is when your grease is so thick that it makes your knife move too slow. Now, I've never ever put a grease on a knife that was so thick that it kept it from moving. I'm pretty sure you'd have to use bearing grease, like what I said. But even then, you would need a really light knife, like a 51, that doesn't have a whole lot of weight and inertia when flipping it around for that to even matter much. The only time that I've ever put too thick of a grease on a knife was on, my squiddy, because it's plastic, it has very low weight, and using normal lubricants is just too much. It's better to run these things dry, in my opinion, because it's plastic. It doesn't weigh a whole lot. The surfaces don't wear out as much. Mine's even cracked by the Zen pins, if you can see that. You can kind of see it. Come on, focus. Yeah. But, yeah. That's the one time I've used too thick grease. So thicker grease equals better, up to a certain extent. So, why is it better? It doesn't wear off as fast, too. It's harder to get rid of the grease. Like, it'll stay on your hands longer, too. It's just harder to get rid of it. So, thicker grease usually has more tactility to it, I think is the term you would use. It's stickier. And you would think, oh, sticky isn't something I want in my pivots, but it is, because the stickier grease is, the longer it will stay in your pivots. So, I haven't greased my 51 in a while, so I might as well do it. So the one downside to using thick, sticky grease is that it's going to push out all the worn out graphite crap that builds up from when you don't have your knife greased. And whenever you lubricate it, it's going to get pushed out to the sides a little bit because it's thicker. You don't need as much of it, too, mind you that as well. It takes a little longer to work into the nooks and crannies, but I think the benefits outweigh it. And the one big downside is that it typically leaves your knife covered in grease whenever you start flipping it. And you got to profusely wipe it off as the gross stuff comes out. So, yeah, that's a caveat. Some people don't want to deal with that. I find it annoying myself. But not the end of the world. So, while I'm with you today, I'm going to grease my 51. So, how do you deal with rust? Well, it's very simple. Thankfully, I don't have really any rust beyond just very, very minimal pitting. That's not even going to come up on the camera. Just very, very minuscule stuff. So, the way that you keep a balisong from rusting and the way you deal with rusting. I'll go over how you deal with rust first. So the way you deal with rust is you take your lubricant of choice. Typically, petroleum distillates are the best at doing this. And if you have a knife that's like completely rusted out, like just the whole thing is like red. It's just red-brown completely. This isn't going to work very well. But if you just have a knife that has little rust stains and stuff like that, this will be a good way to work it out. So the best way to get rid of rust is with time. Forcing the rust away with sandpaper is not a good idea. I was thinking before this video, if I say use sandpaper, that's going to really upset some people. Now, I don't think you should use sandpaper. Don't get me wrong. I think the coarsest sandpaper that you should ever take to a knife blade, if you care about the finish, should never be direct, and it should be a sheet of print paper. That's the grittiest sandpaper I'll take to a blade, which is to say, I'll never take any sort of paper and rub it on my knife blade. Maybe a paper towel, but no, sandpaper is not the answer. I hear people ask that a lot. Hey, should I take sandpaper to my knife? If you care about the finish of your blade, which you will afterwards, if you think you don't and then you go do it, you're gonna wish you didn't. So don't take sandpaper to your knife. What I recommend is that you take some lubricant, be it WD-40, be it grease. I will say the thinner your lubricant is, the faster it's going to wear off. And the lubricants in a lot of cases are going to combine with the water molecules and it's going to remove them. So what's going to happen is that any moisture on the surface of your blade that's actually preventing rust from happening is going to get wiped away. And then it's going to rust faster. So typically, if you're going to do this, I'd recommend a thicker grease. Now, I'm in the world of brass instruments, so I love my brass instrument grease because this grease is designed to be used on instruments made out of brass, which is a softer metal than steel, and those instruments cost thousands and thousands of dollars. So, yeah, I just prefer this kind of grease. It's just my preference. You can find this stuff really easily. Bach, tuning slide grease. My favorite stuff in the world for knives. I have a lifetime supply of this stuff for sure. And I have other stuff for valves. It's a thinner stuff. So this stuff works great. So what you do, after all the ado of 18 minutes of me rambling about other stuff, how do you get rid of the rust on your blade? Very simple. Man, I really baited y'all like this was some kind of like video that was actually monetized and I was making money off of every second I rambled on. I'm not. I just like talking. And yeah, I just like hearing my own voice, obviously. So what you do is you're going to take some lubricant and you're going to put it on. You don't need a whole lot, just a little bit. That's probably more than what I even needed. So the lubricant's on your blade. Now what? The rust is going to go away automatically. Just kidding. So what I like to do is I like to take a microfiber cloth and then I massage the grease into the blade. Obviously, if you have a sharp knife, don't cut into the fabric as you do it, but you can kind of see, you actually can't see it at all. You can't see it at all. You can see the grease on here and you can see the streaks, kind of, but yeah. Just work the grease into all the crannies. So when you're done, because you used a thick grease, it's not going to leave a whole lot of residue because you wiped most of it off. And steel pores, like the pores in the steel are like the pores on your skin. So the thicker stuff isn't going to work in as easily, but the thicker stuff is going to be harder to work out, which means that it's going to stay in the pores of the steel longer. So I'm going to apply a little more grease just because a liberal coating of grease doesn't hurt nobody. And I'm going to continue to massage the grease into the side of my blade. So something that you're going to notice is that it's going to get real shiny. That's one thing. You can do it into the spine of the blade. You don't have to worry about specifically doing the edge, but whatever you do, I'm not responsible if you cut yourself. Use common sense. Don't force the live edge of the knife, like on this side, into the cloth as you use it. So, because a knife is going to cut things. Man, I'm congested. So yeah, just work it in, and then get on the other side, put a little more grease in on the blade. See, there's some grease on there. And then I'm going to take my cloth, and I'm going to work it into the blade. So what this does is help prevent rust, for one. But two, I don't understand the science behind it, but anytime I've had rust on a blade, if I just take some grease and I just massage it in every day or so, just, for a few minutes, just massage the grease in, the rust will just work itself away. It's weird. I don't understand how it works. I don't have any scientific data or evidence to support why that would happen, but it just disappears over time. Now, that works with thinner grease, that works with thicker grease. You just want to work it in with like a microfiber cloth and just work in the grease. You want to wipe off the excess. And the beautiful thing about steel is that because there's pores in it, think of pores like little holes in the ground. Like in the road. When you're driving along, the rocks on the asphalt are little bumps that you drive over, but they're so small that your tire glazes right over them. And you don't feel every little bump unless you're in a little go-kart or a vehicle with 0 shock absorbers or springs. It just feels like a nice smooth ride, even though that it's a very bumpy little road. So, yeah, sorry, brain fart here. So because the steel is porous, it has those little bumps. But because your finger is like the tire of going over a road, you're not going to feel the pores of the steel. So once you wipe off all of the material that's like glazing the hole over top of the think of it like this. So like once you wipe off all of the grease that's over the top, you still have grease that's in between the nooks and the crannies of the pores. And that doesn't get on your hands. But what it does do is that it helps prevent your steel from rusting, because it's not the soft part of the steel that rusts. That's why mirror polished blades don't rust very easily, because they're super, super smooth. The water can't get into the pores, and it's very, very densely packed molecules. It can't accept water and to rust as easily. And I want to say that's why they like chrome plating stuff back in the early days. You can't get chrome plating worth a darn anymore, unfortunately. You got to go to Mexico to get a nice chrome plate. But yeah, so now my blade is protected from rust, and if I did have rust on my blade, I would just continue to wipe it down with grease every day or so, and you could sit there and like rub it in for a few hours. I know that's slightly suggestive, but I mean, at least it works. So congratulations, you've now worked the rust out of your blade. And if it doesn't work, let me know. You can find something else to do. There's obviously those other cleaners. So another option you could do if you were really desperate, like if your blade was just completely rust coated, is that you could put it in one of those, what are they called? They have a little bucket. They're green solution. They're called parts cleaners. High frequency parts cleaners, ultrasonic, that's what it is. Those ultrasonic cleaners do work quite well. My dad has one, and I've seen him use it on rusty bolts before. It helps get it most of the way down. So what I recommend is that anytime you ever get your knife wet, period, anytime your knife gets wet with water or anything that's mostly water-based, you spill a soda on your water or whatever. You spill a soda on your knife, or you accidentally drop it in the sink, or it rains outside while you're carrying your knife and your blade's wet. The nearest time, the closest time to the event that you can, just take some grease and rub it all over the blade, and then do the next step, which is put some in the pivots. So when you're putting some grease in the pivots, what you're going to do is get a little grease on the end of the thing and just put it, and then kind of rub it up against the handles. You don't need much. A little goes a long way. You can always add more. It's a little messy if you add a whole bunch up at the front. So yeah. So you can work the grease in, you can flip the knife, and you're going to notice the sound is going to change, because, and I understand the science of that. So whenever you put a liquid on something, it affects the way that it resonates, because whenever you whenever you, what's the word? Whenever you shock a system, you shock an object, like whenever you, I don't know, knock on a desk, it's vibrating the whole desk. And because the desk has nothing on it, that desk is a membrane that resonates and vibrates as the molecules are compressed and uncompressed in a resonating fashion, and emits a sound. So whenever you put lubricant on a balisong, the blade, the washers, the handles, the bushings if you have them, the pins, they're going to change their sound profile because they have grease on them. And it's kind of like in the same fashion if you put your hand on a membrane when you knock on it. It sounds higher pitched whenever you put your hand on it because it can't resonate. The wavelengths are shorter. Now, that doesn't apply identically to lubricating pivots on a balisong, but if you're wondering why lubricating a balisong affects the way that it sounds, that's why. Because it literally affects the way that the materials resonate when they connect with each other when you're flipping it. So, that's the next step. And the final step is for the forbidden flippers, the people that leave the latch on their balisong. I know, foreign concept. I don't know anyone who still flips a knife with a latch on it anymore these days. Now, I don't like latches very much, but I like spring latches, and because these don't get in the way, and because I like to carry my 51, even though it's a very rare, not a very rare, but one of the rarer 51s, excuse me, it's convenient to have a pocket clip. And I'm not taking this thing off, but if I'm leaving it on, might as well use it. So, I like a latch. A nice latch doesn't hurt nobody, unless you're a prestigious flipper and you gotta have maximum performance all the time. I think it was Nardath that said, clip on, latch off, or latch off, clip on, something like that. It's a good way of flipping, for marking it. I mean, you obviously get to a point where you kind of know where one handle is over the other, but I've very well picked up my Alpha Beast before without any indication of where it was, and just been flipping it, and then I think I know where the bite handle is, and I think I know where I am, and bazinga, I put a cut in my hand. Whoops. Never be too safe. So, to grease a latch, it's the same as the pivots, you just kind of work some in there. But with the 51 latch, you can see, if you can see, because my filming setup is degraded over every single year of me doing content. Goodness gracious. Focus. Focus. This is good enough. So you can see the membrane kind of pushes in whenever, there you go, you can kind of see it there. The membrane pushes in whenever I push the latch in, and that's how the latch gets pushed out, and it doesn't want to hold a position right here. And whenever I push the latch all the way into the lock position, it pushes it out. And this, what's funny is that the pivots on a 51 don't have bushings, but the latch does. And why not lubricate it? So just take a little lubrication and just put it in the hole. So before this drop of lubrication gets to the latch, let's hear what the latch sounds like. So, it's a little quieter because it's been lubricated before, but just kind of work the lubrication into the latch. I know this is an absolutely terrible filming perspective, but, you know, do the latch thing a few times. Maybe if it needs a little more, give it just a, no, that's good. Just, you know, lubricate it. And then you have a knife that sounds absolutely fantastic, and it's protected from rust. And thankfully, a lot of knives these days are aluminum and titanium. I miss the steel days. I really do. I love a good steel balisong. I'd love, one of my grails would be a steel 4X. specifically is 49, but on these titanium and G10 and aluminum knives, you don't have to worry about the handles rusting, so you don't have to put any grease on them, which would affect the flippability to an extent for sure. So yeah, 51. It sounds a lot better when it's properly lubricated. So do I need to add more grease to the pivots? Yeah, I could. So I'm going to wipe off with a microfiber cloth all the grease that built up on the sides of the handles. Get all the grease out. It's good to disassemble these every now and then and get the grease that gets trapped between the liner and the scale, because that does happen if you have a sandwich knife that has scales and liners, whatever you want to call them. If it were me, I probably would have named it the frame and maybe the scales, or the frame and the frame and the chest, the frame and the body. I know, typical me, car Chris. But, you know, maybe put a little bit more grease on it. You know, just a little smidget more grease doesn't hurt nobody. And that did not even touch the actual blade. You want to make sure you actually make contact between the handle and the blade just a little bit, because you want it to work into the washers, so it's got to be touching the blade and the handle. So you can see, you really can't see all that well. So you can kind of see the greases between the handle and the blade. So the more grease you put on, clearly the more messy it's going to be, but the more it's going to work in. So, if you remember how this thing sounded at the beginning of the video, it sounds a little bit different than what it sounds like now. And it just feels oh so buttery smooth. Nothing like some titanium handles on a steel blade, mesh between them with no bushings, but just some phosphorus bronze washers. Flips like a pro. Not really, not in today's standards, but it flips like a classic. It flips smooth. It feels real nice in the hand. It's controllable. And most importantly, it's not going to rust. Ugh, I can't flip two-handed in this position. Give it a try. Yeah, that's not even in frame. Yep, a little grease is built up on the sides. Got to wipe that off. It seems counterintuitive to wipe grease off that you just put on, but what gets pushed out to the sides is all the dirt, grime, and graphite that gets built up. And that's the old stuff that gets pushed out. When you put new grease in, it's going to work itself in with the old grease, and some of the old grease is going to get pushed out. Just sounds heavenly, doesn't it? And inevitably, my hands are a little greasy. Something that's important to note is that any oil that you should use on a test sample of the material that you're going to use if it's a synthetic material. Now, this isn't really a problem these days, from what I've seen, but it's a good thing to point out, because even if it's not likely by any chance, it's a possibility if it's happened to someone before. So, there was a Knife Zoid video I watched years ago, where he was like, there was this lubricant that I put on my knife, and it got on my G10, and it just started eating away at it. So I just had to wipe it off. So yeah, if you have a G10 knife that you really care about that's irreplaceable, like a 51, 1501 or something like that, I would probably say that you'd want to find some G10 that's a little less valuable and put it on there first, if you don't know if it's going to be good or not. The way to get around that is just to buy the best grease that you can buy, which is Bach Slide